and he spoke to him. If you want to follow, you have a Chumash, page 585. If you have some other Chumash, I'd encourage you to find the beginning of the book of Leviticus. It's so nice that we have this opportunity to start a book together, albeit in this very strange format. And I want to begin not with the Parsha, but I want to begin with a statement, or at least an article that is written in this week's Jewish Week. This week's Jewish Week, as I hope many of you received it at home, has a wonderful article about the humility in Vayikra. It's written by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, one of the incredibly great rabbis of our generation. I've had an opportunity in my life to study from him, to learn from him, both in his writings and as he preached at the Lincoln Square Synagogue. Now resides in Efrat in Israel. Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, what a great, great mind. And I say all this because it's really important for me to show my extraordinary respect for him, even though in this week's Parsha I couldn't disagree with him more about his analysis. In this week's Parsha, he writes the following. We begin the third book of the Torah, the book known as Torat Kohanim, the book of the priests, ministers of the divine sanctuary, guardians of the rituals connecting Israel to God. And he says that here is a moment where God calls to Moses to come forward. In this article, he explains that he has to call Moses forward because the ending of last week's Parsha, the ending of the book of Exodus, has a moment in which God fully inhabits the tabernacle, and therefore there's no room for Moses. And then he goes on to explain that we have to recognize our boundaries as human beings, that you can get close to God, you just can't stand right next to God. And that we have to understand the humility of what it means to be human in the face of God. And he gives wonderful examples. And I would add to his examples the story of the Tower of Babel. And he gives us these examples to explain that there are boundaries between us and the Almighty. And that we have not to try to fly so high. And understand the limits of what it means to be human. And while I think that's a wonderful analysis of the relationship between God and humanity, I think it leaves us somewhat void of the feelings of what it means to stand in the presence of the Almighty. He gives us the example that Aaron has two sons who die, Nadav and Avihu. He explains it's because they were trying to do something more than they could do. And in that process, they overreached. And because of that, they died. I think the message is very, very simple. Of Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav, that the opening words of this morning's Parsha says God calls out to Moses because Moses might have been feeling distant from the Almighty, that there was no room for him. And so God says, Moses, come a little closer. Don't be shy. I know you're hearing a commercial there. Come a little closer. Now don't be shy. All right, sorry. I think that the lesson is a really important one, and that is that we feel distant from people at times. It's incredibly important that in those moments where we feel distant, that we don't just simply expect that the other will just know to come closer. But rather, it's incredibly important that you call that person to come closer. Vayikra means call out to them. Say, come closer to me. Early on, there was a commercial for, I don't remember exactly what maybe Southern Atlantic Bell or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was for a telephone company. Reach out and touch someone was what the telephone company was explaining to us. So there are moments where we want the isolation and the solitude. There are moments in which we feel that everybody is on top of us and we need some of our own personal space. That's absolutely true. But the phrase Vayikra says, come closer. You got to get a little closer. I need to feel you by my side. So I encourage you just to read the introduction or read the article written by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. See if you like it. I hope that you do. It's really a wonderful perspective on the Parsha. But now I want to launch into what I want to study with you this morning. And that is, what is this prayer all about? Or what is rather this Parsha all about? I apologize. I want to share with you first something that Rabbi Ilana Fass taught this week in the weekly newsletter that comes from the conservative yeshiva in Israel. Rabbi Ilana Fass writes as following. As many of us find ourselves separated from family and friends, from communities, synagogues, and organizations with whom we normally are in fellowship, it can be hard to feel the closeness of community. We're experiencing an exile from our normal way of life. At the same time, we are confronting a deathly serious pandemic impacting the entire world and demanding tremendous sacrifices from people, particularly those on the front lines in medical fields, public services, and service industries. And then she concludes, we don't have temple sacrifices. And right now, temporarily, we don't have our normal in-person communities, but we still have the opportunity, likarev, to draw close through prayer to God and to one another. So writes Rabbi Ilana Fass. It's a great statement. She's picking up on the word karban, the word for sacrifice. And if you look at the word korban very closely, you'll see that it has 3 root letters, kuf, resh, vet, which are the words for karov, to bring close. The way the Jewish people in the tabernacle in the desert, the way the Jewish people in the temple in Jerusalem felt close to God was by bringing an animal or a wheat or a grain or an incense offering. And that way they could draw closer to God. The Zohar reminds us from the writings of Isaiah, Machshavoto, God's thinking is not the same as ours, but what are we going to do in a primitive age but to access God the way the primitive mind worked? And that was to bring a sacrifice. Our rabbis teach us very clearly that it's possible that today's prayer has superseded the sacrifice. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the role of prayer today? And I would suggest there are 3 important roles for prayer. One is to commune with others. If we were in a sanctuary together with other people, if we weren't sitting in our homes by ourselves, we would be communing with others. We would be drawing ourselves closer. The demand of a minyan says you can't always do this by yourself. If you want to achieve a level of kedusha, of holiness that's greater than we can do on our own, you got to do it with other people. The second is to commune with God. We have to find moments of quiet in our own souls to commune with God, to recognize that God is a part of our lives, that God is real. God's not a figment of our imagination. We didn't make up God. God made us. And so we have to have these moments to reflect on the nature of the universe and the capacity to believe in an Almighty. And then to offer our deepest, most inner thoughts. We have to offer them because we need to say them out loud. Because that's the third achievement of prayer, and that is to commune with ourselves. I would suggest to you that the challenge of this moment in time is the challenge of the latter 2 and not the first. We're all talking about community now and how absent it feels in our lives. And we're scrambling to figure out how to reconstitute community when we can't be near anyone. And the virtual community was born. But my lesson to you this morning is a much simpler lesson, and that is, let's focus on the other two as well. Let's not lose sight of the other two, and that is the opportunity to figure out what's going on in our own lives, to realign our priorities, to figure out who we are, and then ultimately to draw closer to the Almighty. Reb Chizkiyahu was in the presence of Rabbi Shimon, says the Zohar. He said to him, that which is called korban should be called kiruv. That which is called drawing near, rather than that which is called sacrifice. Yet, though the people of Israel are in exile, the Blessed Holy One is among them and precedes them to the synagogue, exclaiming, turn back, O wayward children, I will hear your waywardness. The prophet Jeremiah, being quoted in the book of the Zohar, says something very, very simple. Work on your relationship with the Almighty. We may not be able to be near each other, but we can be near to God. We may not be able to come together in the synagogue and talk about what happened in our week with each other. We can do it on the phone, but now is the moment to recognize that God precedes us wherever we are. And then the Rambam, Maimonides, seals the deal with the following statement. He says, Aval hatfilot vatchina hi muteret bechol makom umi uvechol mi sheyizdamen. Maimonides says something extraordinary. He says, prayer, and I'm quoting from his guide for the perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim, but prayer and supplication can be offered everywhere and by every person. B'chol makom, uv'chol mi sheyizdamen. All you gotta do is want it, and then you can achieve it. You can accomplish it, if that's what you desire. The book of Leviticus is the hardest book for us to preach on, because it's filled with ancient rituals and rites from which we feel extraordinarily distant. We can't imagine what it would be like to offer a sacrifice, to take an animal, to slaughter it, and offer it up as a smell to the Almighty so that God would enjoy it. That's a world that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But there are things that do. And that is, sometimes in our lives we have to figure out exactly who we are and what we're doing here. The book of Leviticus says we're going to offer parts of ourselves up to the Almighty. We're going to put it out into the universe in the hopes that what will return is some extraordinarily positive energy and encouragement for us to achieve great things. Remember, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin talks of overreaching. I say there's no such thing as overachieving. God has created us with abilities. And when we achieve great things, it's not because we've gone beyond ourselves. It's because we have done what we're capable of doing. Because God has given us that capacity. So my message to you is a simple one. I hope that you've enjoyed our time together this morning. I hope that you gained something from it. I hope that you had moments of meditation, moments of singing, moments of praying. I hope that some of the explanations that I've offered you this morning, that the study of the Parsha was in some way enlightening. But what I hope for most is it's given you an opportunity to look inside yourself and to reach as high as you can for the Almighty and understand that the coming together of yourself to become whole in a time of extraordinary fragmentation is hard. I bring you incredible love and compassion and honesty and truth. and in understanding that this challenge of these times will make us better people if we use this moment to learn about ourselves, our relationship with God, and then bring those back to our community once we're reconstituted. Shabbat Shalom. I don't know if anybody's still listening, but I thought I'd share a couple jokes as long as we were finished. These would be like the bloopers afterwards. So I just want everybody to know that 8 p.m. is the official time to be changing out of your day pajamas and putting on your night pajamas. I don't know about you, but I feel like the earth is sending us all to our rooms to think about what we've done. What if they close the grocery stores? Will we have to hunt for our own food? I don't even know where Doritos live. If you see me talking to myself this week, mind your own business. I'm having a parent-teacher conference that I think is a funny one for all those parents at home. Who the heck put virus and allergy in the same season, in the same month? I don't know if I should buy Zyrtec or turn myself into the CDC. Curious, does anyone happen to know which Hunger Games district we live in? Can we please follow the government instructions so we can knock this COVID-19 out and be done? I feel like a kindergartner who keeps losing recess time because one or two kids can't follow instructions. PSA, this is a public service announcement. Every few days, try your jeans on to make sure they still fit. Pajamas will have you believe that the spaces between, will have you believe that all is well in the kingdom. Out of an abundance of caution, the MLA and Chicago Manual of Style will be reinstituting the 2 spaces between each sentence rule. I like that one. You just have to think about it. I'm having a quarantine party this weekend, and none of you are invited. For I hear that homeschooling is going well. Unfortunately, 2 students have already been suspended for fighting, and the teacher was fired for drinking on the job. Somewhere out there, a kid brought the hamster home for the weekend. I asked a Walmart worker where I could find the nuts. He said, in the toilet paper aisle. If the schools are closed for too long, the parents are going to find a vaccine before the scientists do. And with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and goodbye.